Well, hey, welcome so much to the Trinity podcast. Great to see you all with us. And I know we have many of you that listen regularly every single week, and we are thankful for the opportunity to get to know you and the comments that you've sent in. But I do have some sad news. So, well, it's not sad. It's just kind of important news. This is the season 1 finale of our podcast. So we have obviously Thanksgiving and Christmas and many things going on over the next couple of weeks. So we will pick it back up after in the new year, 2023. But the pressure is on. We have to make this a really good podcast because this is the season 1 finale.
That's great.
So, but anyways, my name's Joel. I'm going to be the host for you today. And again, with us, we have Daniel Riddick, Tommy Carr, and Tom Messer on the podcast today. And gentlemen, we've been talking about generosity in our church and how to live generously. In fact, one of our values is we want to be a generous people because we serve a generous God. So I would love to hear some stories from you right off the bat as we continue this discussion. Share one time in your life that you can remember where somebody was generous to you personally or your family, and just the impact that it had on you. It could be something at a young age. And I'll start with mine and give you a second to think about this, because obviously I've had time to think about it. So when my wife and I were just married, we had only been married for about a year. We were living here in Jacksonville, and we were living over off Blanding Boulevard in some apartments there. I was working here at TCA. She was working at a bank, and our apartment got broken into. And just the person that broke in just was looking for a few things to sell and decided to smash everything in his way to get so it was a traumatic experience. We were just married, got all this stuff in our apartment, and our apartment was broken into. And we very quickly moved to different apartments, and we obviously were going to have to figure out how to replace all this stuff. We couldn't find it. The guy had taken it. And we went out to eat with a gentleman named Tim Lee. Most of you probably have met or know Tim very well. Well, my wife is really good friends with his daughter, BFFs, I would say. They are really good friends. Anyways, I'd never really met Dr. Tim before, and we went out to eat at Red Lobster. I think he was in town for an event.
Cheddar biscuits.
Those cheddar biscuits are good. But I specifically remember this being young, just out of college, newly married. Our house was just broken into. We had dinner with them. And as we were leaving the restaurant, again, this is the first time I'd ever met him. He pulled me aside. He's like, "Young man, come over here. Your name's Joel, right? You're married to Christy." "Yes, sir." "Yes, sir." And I just remember him handing me some money. Again, I'd never met him before. And him saying, "Hey, take this and just replace those things that guy stole from you." And obviously that was 20 some years ago. But I still remember to this day that someone I'd never met before, he just out of his generosity decided to give me some money to go buy a new TV because that guy had taken it. And I don't know, it just really meant a lot to me. I've never forgotten that.
Yeah. You know, of course, Tim and I are really good friends. He's one of the most generous people I've ever been around in my life. I mean, I have seen him give away thousands of dollars to people.
Yeah.
He just has a gift of generosity. That's really a great story.
Yeah, that's a great story.
I agree with that for sure.
You know, I can think of a couple of things. One, though, that immediately came to my mind was same thing. Jen and I were just married, moving into a one-bedroom apartment. I think this was right before we got married, and we were getting everything situated. And we had a great friend in our life, and she was a widow, and you know, had a good job and everything, but also money was tight. She was living on her own, and she showed up one weekend with a brand new, you know, we were kind of getting everything situated, washer and dryer for our our apartment, and we were just both like, you know, we were really happy with people who, you know, giving us cards with, you know, $20 bill in it, you know, and saying congratulations. You know, she showed up with that, and it was both the relationship. It meant so much, but then also recognizing that legitimately it was like a sacrificial, gift just to bless us. And so it was really, really, really powerful.
I love that. Pastor, over to you.
Yeah, boy, this brings back a lot of memories. Let me tell you probably an early impression. I came here, went on staff at Trinity in 1982, and a few years later I was teaching a 10th grade Sunday school class, and back then our church was very traditionally organized, very Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night Sunday school. Sunday school was a big deal, age graded Sunday school. And Tommy was in the class, which,
Wait, Tommy was in your 10th grade boys?
Yeah.
That is
We
true.
talk
Okay, I
about
just want
that
to
a lot.
clarify that.
So, and it was such a great group of kids. I loved those kids, and we had just had a lot of fun together, and had maintained a lot of relationship with them over the years. And I'd been by that time I'd been here a couple of years, and was trying to find my footing in ministry. Like, is this what you really want to do with the rest of your life? And we were talking off before we started the podcast, but I wasn't making any money, and I'm not saying that critically or disparaging. I'm sure that people think that now that work for us, that man, they don't pay me any money. I really felt that, and I can't remember exactly what the issue was. I know it was we were coming up towards Christmas, and I can't remember if the pressure was Christmas or there was but there was a real financial pressure in our life, and there was a family whose kid, you would know him. His dad owned a business, and he's kind of a rough kid. It just was it took a lot of effort to manage him, and I had tried. I loved the kid and loved all of them, and we had a lot of fun together, and we didn't feel like we were doing anything special. We were just teaching the class and trying to pour into the kids and trying to make sure they were there every week, and that they kind of knew that somebody cared about them in their life. And this family came up to me after church on a Sunday night and said, look, we want to give you something. And then it wasn't awkward, didn't make a big deal about it. It said, God just laid you and Lisa on our heart, and we want to do this, and we want you to know we appreciate what you're doing to pour into our son, and it is making a difference. And I can't remember exactly how much money it was, but it was several $100 bills that they gave us. And, it was such a windfall
Right, yeah.
in proportion to, and the conscious decision on my part was, I want to be generous like that. It wasn't just that,
Yeah.
I was deeply humbled and very appreciative of it, but I thought, man, I would love to get to a place in my life where, the thought of me giving $100 away at that time would have been just overwhelmingly, how could you ever do that? But their generosity towards me inspired me to want to be generous towards other people.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, similar stories. I think they all start because you can remember when you first got married. Nobody has money. Everybody has these. I just got married stories.
Right, that's right.
So Rhoda and I had just been married, and I look back and I really see how generous my parents were. Like my mom and dad were always so generous in bringing food and money and giving me a great education.
How long is that generosity supposed
It's
to
still
last?
going on. It's still going on. It's still happening. And so mom and dad have always been that way. Rhoda's parents have always been real giving. So we had gone out to her grandparents' house, and her grandfather was such a sweet old man, and he just called us over. And he always called me by the wrong name just for fun because Rhoda dated a few people.
Yeah.
And so he would always call me by the last 2 or 3 people's names. I'm like, I am Tommy.
Yeah.
And he goes, I just want to tell you I love you. I know it's hard getting started in marriage. And he handed us a check. And so we got in the car and opened it, and it was $1,000.
Yeah.
And this is 1988. And Rhoda looked at me. She goes, "We're rich.
Yeah.
We're rich."
It's
And
all
so
relative.
it was so relative. It was the most money we'd ever seen in one place at
I
a
get
time.
it.
It didn't just triple and quadruple our bank account.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
just. I'm like, Rhoda, what are we going to do with all this money? That's what it felt like. So those are just moments you look back and it was specifically great. Another one is we had just been married a short time, and one of our deacons, Tillman Bagsley Sr., he had asked me,
He's the guy that gave me that money.
is he really? Okay, so I didn't know that. But so I'm close friends with his son, and he goes, "Hey, Tommy, I'm doing this tour of homes." And he lived in Samuel Wolfson's home up on the north side.
In Springfield.
In Springfield area. And he goes, "Would you mind coming by and playing the piano, just play some period music from the Joplin era?" I said, "Yeah, I'll do that, Brother Baxley. I'd love to." He goes, "Just do it for 2 or 3 hours in the morning while the tour is going on. So when we got done, he goes, "Hey, I want to pay you." I said, "Listen, I love playing. It was great just to be here." He goes, "No, I'll just give you a few dollars." It was in an envelope. We got in the car. Rhoda was with me. We opened it. It was $250 cash. And I'm like, I only worked 4 hours for $250. I'm going to hit the road in a bus.
The
But he was
Baxters
so
are just
giving.
very generous people.
Yeah, just so giving. So those things just stood out. When you were first married, that was the difference between eating, going out and eating, and making your budget. So really great stories, great people for sure.
So when we look at the history of our church, we have these booklets that have been, distributed. Obviously, we distributed them last year, our Multiply mission, 2-year vision. And there's a really cool timeline in here of just our church and what God has done since 1915. And I was going to make a joke, Pastor, about getting memories from you back in
44 years before I was
44 years. Okay, that's good.
My dad turns 100 in June. He was born in 23.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's crazy. So as we look at this timeline and just looking over it and seeing just all the things that we've been able to do here in the city of Jacksonville, I'm interested just overall, and everyone can chip in, but I'll start with Pastor. How has generosity, we talked about how it affected us, but how has it affected our church? Over the years, how has generosity affected our church?
Yeah, and I don't want to dominate the conversation, but so let me do this quickly. And again, we did in full disclosure, we've talked about this as a group a little bit ago, and it's amazing to me. We're just a small group of people, and when we say we, the church was a small group of people in a very fairly obscure part of town, and now we own land in 3 different counties and have multiple sites and multiple ministries, and it's just kind of amazing. The rescue mission and the youth camp both started in the early 60s. What happened was a vision was cast for, hey, we can do this with our kids in camp. We have this opportunity, and a spontaneous giving service broke out, and they raised enough money to purchase what is now Trinity Youth Camp. About a year or so later, same event. That's how the Trinity Rescue Mission launched, and the spontaneous giving service broke out. If you fast forward in 2003, I was had been pastoring 11 years or close to it at that time, and we were having women show up at our rescue mission facility in downtown Jacksonville, and we were having to turn them away. It was just a safety issue, and at that time there was no beds for women and children. Homelessness had changed, and it has changed dynamically over the years so much. It just was the homeless providers, shelter providers, were slow to respond to the uptick in women and children being homeless and on the street, and it was bothering me terribly that I just couldn't fathom, how can we not house these people? How are we turning them away? And I started talking about it with people, and we made a decision. And I don't even know that it was I don't even know how the healthy process was at the time, but we just made a decision we were gonna expand our rescue mission facility to include a shelter for women and children. And we had just talked about it, and we got into a Tuesday night Thanksgiving service, and spontaneous giving broke out. It's kind of an interesting thing, but my wife was one of the catalysts of that, and I knew we were in trouble in a good way when during our farm guys were singing a song, and she got up and took her wallet out of her purse, or the money part of her purse. She took it out. She went to the front steps of the altar in the front of the auditorium, and she emptied out all her cash and all of her change, and it's literally bouncing off the thing. I was just sitting there thinking, she's a lot more tenderhearted than I am, and I thought, well, bless her heart. I mean, I'm glad that's probably going to impact some people. And I mean, we were there for hours.
Yes.
You were there.
I was underscored.
Did you hear them?
See,
I was playing the keyboard the whole time.
I was not
Yeah.
there, but I've heard about
It's
the
unbelievable.
service.
$104,000.
Yeah.
And just actual cash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. People went home.
Yeah.
People
came
went
back?
home and got money and came back and put the money on. And they were walking to the, not one, we never passed an offering plate. All the money was in cash.
Was it in this auditorium?
In
Yes.
this auditorium.
You were playing the keyboard.
Yes.
It was
For as long as Tom said it to the keyboard.
it was a very moving.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I know I'm rambling. The moves of God are really unusual in church life, and when you have them, you have to live in the moment. It is the real glory cloud of the Shekinah glory of God. You get that sense of it. In our church, historically, it's happened around three things. It's happened in these ways. It usually, largely, it's the catalyst is what happens with young people. Young teenagers, young people, teenagers, young adults. When older people, the spiritual temperature in church is always set by young people. And that's why such deep commitment to second generation ministry or generation ministry is really important. In our church, we've typically responded well to the needs of the poor. That if you look at what we do, a lot of our ministries have been aimed at reaching people that really can't pay you back for reaching them. And I'm not saying that to make us look good. It's just we've had a heart for the poor, and we should have, and I hope that we always do. And no matter what, we should. Missions, which I think fits a little bit into that poor, but it's kind of the surrender of our people saying, "Hey, I'm going to go do this," and then they're going to places where they're really ministering to people in poverty. Those have been big moves for God. And then the other one has just been generosity. It's just been an opportunity for us to pour out. I mean, we're seeing it. I mean, I think you can talk about it, Daniel, but you know, the whole thing about Oakleaf is, I think the story at the end of the day is going to be written in a lot of different ways, but a piece of that story, it is changing the way people are responding generously with their money, because they are now uniting around a cause that's bigger than themselves. They're actually literally making an eternal investment. And they're going to put up a building, and when I say they, we are going to put up a building in Oakleaf that says, God matters enough to us that we would sacrifice to do this because it really matters for us to be able to be a witness and a testimony and to create a place, a space in Oakleaf for people to come and know Jesus Christ and experience the life that God has for them. And it moves people to be generous. And there's incredible generosity stories being written over those kind of issues.
Daniel, have you seen the generosity out at Oakleaf?
You know, it's so interesting and I do love this, and we will have showed it again on Sunday, that timeline, which highlights certainly just a small sampling, but significant moments in our church history. The vantage point I have is unique only in that I've been around our ministry for a couple of decades, but our Oakleaf congregation and location, you know, was 8 years old in October in terms of when we launched it. And then inside of that, just the nature of church life, you know, every 5 years you kind of have a pretty solid, we have a lot of military and young families who are still, you know, so I think the turnover even inside of that, you know, it's not a stretch to say that 50% at least of the congregation is probably within, you know, 2 to 3 years of attendance. And when we are removed, and I just mean geographically, from some of the more visible landmarks of what our whole ministry is. So, for example, we're at our Hammond location right now. Even if you are new, you walk out and you go, oh, there's this other thing. There's an academy. There's buildings. There's a college. You can actually see it even if you're new. When you get geographically removed, some of that history it's just less prominent. And it has been really important, but then inspiring for us to kind of situate ourselves in this kind of big move of God. And what Pastor Tom just said is a mantra that I try to say over and over again. Hey, what God is doing in our church includes us. Thank the Lord for that. But it is way bigger than us. And and when people begin to capture that vision that, yeah, this is absolutely going to impact my individual or family experience on Sunday, that's inspiring. But when they begin to realize that we're in a place where we are in part of because of the generosity of generations behind us,
Yeah.
and then that we're being given by the grace of God the opportunity to do again what people have already done for us, for our children, our grandchildren, and hundreds, if not thousands of people we'll never meet in the future. And we're going to be a part of one of these stories, and God willing, 50 years from now, there's going to be somebody standing up there. It's not going to be me. It's not going to be any of us. And they're going to be standing up there going, well, did you know back in 2022, the church did this again? And boy, it really unlocks in the healthiest way. You don't have to manipulate or guilt people into anything. It unlocks in the healthiest way what I'll call that heart to see the kingdom of God expand in the place He's called us.
Does the generosity at Oakleaf have anything to do with Friday night setup?
That may have a small.
No, maybe it's a little bit. No.
Yeah. Hey, listen, it's one of those deals where I'm confident that in the same way, just because I know the history here, the same way everybody looks back on, we used to meet in the gym and we did X, Y, and Z, and we'll talk about it like we were, walking in the snow uphill both ways, We'll get to have that as part of our, part of our history. Hey, we used to do every Friday night. We had to convert, but it helps.
You know what's important, and there's a different. I think about the modern iterations of contemporary church, and I'm a great admirer. I think a lot of those churches will write histories like what we have been able to experience. And so I'm not in any way disparaging that. I love the fact that we have a story to tell, and that our church is finding itself not in our own story, but in the greater story of what God's writing. And we are. I mean, if you said characterize our church, we're not the biggest church in Jacksonville in as far as attendance goes. We're a large church. We're not the most influential church in Jacksonville, but we have a lot of influence, probably maybe even outsized proportionately. But I'm going to just tell this story from I was in a meeting with our college leadership yesterday, and last night one of our college graduates, just one out of thousands who are in ministry. I mean, he's doing things that are deeply impacting orphan care, adoption movements, abortion, advocacy for pro-life movements. And I mean, that's all born out of this little church, in this little place, We have, the last count, I mean, we're getting to a place now, I mean, I could probably put, there's probably 250 churches being pastored by kids who've sat in these pews and been trained here to do ministry. That's an unusual thing. I can trace missionary history where, I see sometimes these churches talking about, our goal in our lifetime is to plant 1,000 churches. We've already done that. Probably multiple times over. I mean, I'm not saying that boastfully.
Yeah.
I really don't want that to come across boastful. But that's what happens when you get to a place and a people stay faithful to God for generations and generations. I mean, 107 years now. And you get away from the hoard mentality, and you get into the multiply sending mentality. And our sending is ultimately the strength of our church is not in its seating capacity, Rick Warren's statement. It's in our sending capacity. It's in the multiply. I mean, look at the kids that come through our academy. They're all over the city of Jacksonville having influence. And, and our people had a vision and sacrificed and have for years shared their space at a very nominal financial investment return, because we believe in Christian education. We believe in training people for ministry. We believe in help keeping homeless people and drug addicts off the street. And that's what's made the impact.
Tommy, you were a student at the academy years ago.
Yeah.
And so you've seen the whole you've seen a lot of this timeline
Yes.
in a way.
Yeah.
How is that, in fact,
Well, when did your
affected
family
you?
get connected to the church?
Late 30s.
Yeah.
Late
wow.
1930s.
Okay.
Yeah. So I look at this timeline, and it's kind of I can trace my family's history with it. So he just said, hey, missions matters. Well, my uncle's brother was the first missionary from Trinity Baptist Church,
How cool is that?
the Touchton family. My grandfather was one of the first deacons. We have a picture of them.
And by the way, there's churches all over the Abacos in the Bahamas that were started by his uncle from our church. And I've had people tell me, say, you're not going to believe this. I went to the Bahamas, went to the Abaco, and they started talking about these churches they found. I said, yeah, our church started that church.
Yeah. And so if you come to my office, and whoever's listening, if you're ever in town, I'd love people to come by my office. You know that. But on the back wall is a picture of our auditorium on McDuff in about 1950. And so seated 3/4 of the way back is my mother as a teenager, my dad as a teenager, my grandmother, and my grandfather. And so you start looking at that legacy, and so we should continue this generosity, because at some point every person either listening to this or comes to our ministry, they merge into this timeline,
right.
and they on-ramp into a story that's been unfolding for 106 years. And I would love to have the ability to go get Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd and refilm Back to the Future and go grab
I
these
love that
people from
movie.
1915 and put them in a time machine,
Yeah.
and see
Yeah.
that simple generosity of very, very common people on the wrong side of the tracks near downtown Jacksonville that just gave out of their love of God have now turned into a campus and multiple campuses and assets worth $100 million, because simple people off McDuff Avenue just said, I'm going to be generous with my things and be tithing and be giving. And it's impacted your family.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
impacted your
absolutely.
family. It's impacted your family.
Right.
And so I think of Bo. I know he's behind the camera, and I've given him a shout out. He's one of our newer employees. And here's what he said. He loves the ministry because legacy matters. And he wants to be able to continue a legacy in his family. So we're really just blessed. As we're in this generosity series, it should be so natural for us to give, because we're just standing on the shoulders of generations of people that gave.
Right.
And it should be as natural as breathing for us.
Daniel, why is generosity then a key component to movements of God? We were talking about all of these things that, God's done through our church, but why is it such a key component?
Well, I think fundamentally this has become, in the church world, has become a little bit of a buzz phrase, but I mean it is what it is. I think generosity at its heart is gospel centered, and I know I've said this every week of this sermon series at least. It's like the most often quoted and iconic scripture statement, which helps communicate the gospel and simplicity, is John 3:16, and the picture of that is God and His love for us, and the demonstration of that says God loved the world this way. That would be the literal translation. How did He do it? He gave. And so I'm not saying it's the only angle, and I'm not saying it's the only layer of the gospel, but I am saying this: the heart of God includes generosity, and if it's at His heart, it should be at the heart of His people, and if it's His practice, it should be the practice of His people. And so and of course then we can expound on that scripturally in example 100 times over. But if you said, why is it so critical to the movement of God? Because if you said, well, what's the ultimate thing God did? He gave. He is a generous God, and we're going to be a generous people.
So good. So good.
It's funny you talk about, as we're doing this generosity series, I've been doing a lot of reading, because for me, 4 weeks in a row on money kind of exhausts what I gotta say about it. I'm just being honest with you. It's like, am I not teaching the same sermon again? So there's a difficulty, even though we're changing passages. So I read something that just smote me in my heart. John Wesley said, when I come across money, I get it out of my hands as fast as possible before it works its way into my heart. And so I'm sitting here going, man, what is a great principle? I don't want money to have my heart. So Tom lives in a beautiful home. You live in a beautiful ranch with farm animals. Beautiful home, beautiful home. God forbid, 100 years from now, Tom probably won't be pastoring. And somebody else, he's invested a lot of money into that house, right? But somebody else is going to live in that home. There'll be a different family with a different last name living in that house. But Lord willing, the work of God will still be going on in this house.
Absolutely.
And He's investing in this house that has eternal rewards in it. So I think that's really helped. I think the generosity journey for me, I'm investing in something in a ministry that has an eternal scope to it.
So as a church, we've been talking about the 4 different areas that we're going to focus on over the next 2 years. And I mean, we can get into the specifics if there are people that are listening or watching that are directly connected to us. But maybe more philosophically, how did we arrive at the 4 things that we're going to focus on? Local ministry, global missions, ministry expansion, and strategic stewardship. And I'm asking because, the student pastor doesn't get to be in on all the cool meetings. You know what I'm saying? So I don't think I was in on this one, but
We had 10 ideas in a bowl, and we
Just
drew 4.
Pulled
Randomly
them out.
drew them.
a new youth worship center. No.
Right, yeah. No, yeah.
You're not missing out on any cool meetings.
Yeah.
And
That's good to know.
I would
you're not.
gladly
Let him-
Trade spots.
I've been in a lot of cool meetings over the years, and there's probably not as much coolness in those meetings as you think. Let me a couple things. So, if you take those particular, I'll make some broad statements that are true. I think there's a misnomer in church life and around churches, and I think there's an institutional crisis that's happening in church life now, where there's a lot of distrust for churches and as institutions in general, churches specifically, and a lot of distrust for pastors. I think pastors, particularly in public ways, can behave badly, and it becomes more difficult for all pastors. And I think that's just a general principle of reality. So here's some important things to remember. All you're giving to a church, any church, not ours, should be viewed in the context of ministry giving. So people say, how much of the money do I give to the church goes into ministry? All of it. It's all ministry money.
Yeah.
There's even including paying people. Somebody told me the other day, and again, I don't want to make a bigger deal about this than it is. It's all part of our deal. But our electric bill is $20,000 a month higher than what we budgeted for this year because of the cost of fuel. Now, that'd sink an average church. It'd be difficult. All money goes to ministry, and we should keep that in mind. True biblical giving in the New Testament, we don't talk about this nearly as much. We want to argue, well, how much should an individual person give? We dealt with that in the sermon last week. Tithe, whatever. The early churches, they simply brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. Not saying that the apostles then did whatever they wanted to. There was healthy accountability. But the point was, giving to ministry actually is giving up control of what you have, and it's giving it over to people who God's placed in leadership to trust them. So vision is formed by the leadership of the church, and there needs to be responsibility for it. So in our 4 categories, local ministry, how are we going to impact the immediate area where we're located? And all dollars is ministry dollars, and some of that goes into helping to support what we do outside of our ministry and Trinity Ministries as a whole. Some of that is how we manage money and reaching campuses, or reaching out through the campuses located. Some of that is how we impact the deep brokenness that exists in the communities around us. So it's how we do local ministry. And then if you go to the 4th one of those, we talk about strategic stewardship. We talk about the long-term future. And that is, we recognize that we're probably going to be here for a while. So we want to not just sow in locally, we also want to deeply impact. We want to be good stewards of what we have today, so that we can enable the next generation of ministry to be able to make a deeper impact. And part of my goal, I've been here 40 years, I've been 30 years in the role of senior pastor. And my goal is someday I'd like to, and this is a little bit figurative, but someday I'd like to, kind of say, okay, this is it, I'm done. I'm just going to sit on the front row and watch you guys do this. And I'm going to say, hey, this is what we had when we started. This is what it is today. And there's bigger and better opportunities for you to make a greater gospel impact proportionately. Now it's your turn. Do more with it. And that's part of what strategic stewardship is. And then insulated inside those 2 It's how are we going to impact the world around us through global missions? How are we going to multiply and do campus work? We're building a building at our Oakleaf campus. We're fully on ramping a third campus into what we're doing. We're obligated to missionary partnerships that we're sowing thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars in to allow them to reach people, and all that is driven out of a gospel vision for who we are, what we're passionate about, and what opportunities God has put in our path to do gospel ministry in a way that's going to reflect God, the heart of God for our church.
Just to echo that sentiment at the very end, and it kind of goes back to your original question, hey, how did we land on these four things? Every now and then, and you can look at that, go back to that timeline of our history. Yeah, sometimes, you get a call of God or a desire to go do something. Hey, we're not doing this, and we're about to go off and do this thing. We're going to start a school or a college or a rescue mission. I think in this context, it was much more in the best way. It was practical. Hey, what are we passionate about? What are we already doing? What do we want to do more of that God's called us to? And they're not. None of these. Some of what we're doing, I think, is groundbreaking. No pun intended, like with the building. But I mean, but it wasn't also though some brand new concept. It was like, hey, local church ministry. Well, this is what God's called us to do. We're in a place to do ministry on Sundays and groups and serving and in our community. We're going to keep doing it, and we're going to keep doing it to the glory of God. Ministry expansion. Before this, we were doing it. We had already launched another location. God was bringing new opportunity, and we have a vision to see that expand. Let's sow into that. Global outreach, and then the strategic vision for the future. And so I think in a lot of ways, it wasn't, the vision is not, and maybe even mostly not something new. It is really kind of clarifying what God is already doing, or kind of the passions that he's given us, and it just gives us an opportunity to maybe talk more specifically or clearly about that.
So just speaking of just one of these, local ministry, I was talking to a guy that walked up during our trunk or treat, and he'd never been on this campus. He had a lot of questions, and he was like, "No, wait. Y'all have a school here?" I was like, "Yeah, we have school. Go all the way up preschool, all the way up to, graduating, from high school." And he's like, "You got a college too?" And I started sharing kind of all these things with him and kind of walking through. And as I did that and was talking to him about it, I was just kind of like, there's a uniqueness about the local ministry that we have opportunity to do here. I can't be around the city of Jackson without running into somebody that knows of Trinity, or they rode a bus here, or they're connected in some way. Have you had similar experience?
Yeah, I think the diversity of the footprint is really unique to our ministry. So you think school, college, rescue mission, rehabilitation, youth camp, church, multiple campuses, missions. I think the footprint of the ministry, it's the same thing. Where you go, you're recognized in different capacities, but that's one of the building blocks. Like you were asking about the four. To me, that's just, what does a healthy New Testament church look like? Those are the four building blocks. Now, there are layers underneath it, but we are really benefited by the diversity of the footprint we have. As from a business standpoint, you'd go, man, there's so many product lines that we have that we can get you into hopefully God's stream in your life in so many areas and so many touch points. So yeah, the diversity of the footprint of outreach is really amazing with local ministry.
And Daniel, you're good friends with many of our missions partners. You've been on missions trips. You're leading another one coming up. How have you seen just the giving of our people affect not just here in this local area, but around the world with all of our missions partners?
Well, I mean, I think the evidence of it is when you're on the ground, you're able to put faces and names and locations to what you've been investing in financially, primarily through prayer and financial support, maybe for years or even decades. And so I think that's significant. I think what's been even more encouraging, and this kind of goes back to that generational view of ministry, is to watch, and that's one of the things I don't think maybe we have talked about as much as we should have. in the last 5 years, and maybe even inside of that window, 4 years of our church, has been one of the most fruitful seasons of sending out young adults, singles, and couples into ministry outside of our community, church planning, international missions, and so when you talk about, well, how does investing in outreach and global outreach, impact the local church? Well, of course, you see the work that's happening around the world. What we don't always see until it comes to fruition in seasons is the work that God has been doing through the giving in the lives of the people sitting in I was going to say our pews, we don't have pews, but in seats every single week, and then all of a sudden they kind of stand up and go, hey, my wife and I are going to some place, and you're like, oh, well, you're a deacon in our church, but let's do it, and you see the visible impact of that. And I think that's been something that's been so incredible. Again, the last few years have been kind of a fresh season of that movement of God in the lives of people, not just to stay and invest. And by the way, I'm really thankful, and we joke about, I'm really thankful that there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that stay and minister in our community. We need that, and that's what God's called us to. But boy, it is powerful when you see people who make, in most cases, really challenging decisions to go.
So just follow this for a moment, Joel. This again, universal principle. It's easy for us to get fixated and say, like we'll make a statement like this, that we should be gracious because God's been gracious to us. We should be generous because God's been generous with us. And we put that in the context of money, right? So if you get money, you should give money. You should give because God's given to you. He gave his son for you. What we fail to realize that this is actually in God's design of the universe, in the moral spiritual law of the universe. There's something about the generosity. When you give things away, you are sowing, and you can have an expectation that you're going to reap from what you sow. That's just a universal moral spiritual law in the universe. That's true about money. That's true about individuals with their money. That's true about churches with their money. That's true about churches with their people. That's true about churches with their assets and resources, right? And it is kind of written into our DNA. We start ministries. We do things to help further the gospel that are fairly expensive and costly to us. And I'm telling you, the history of our church is God keeps turning around and giving us way more than what we've ever sown into. And where our treasure actually is, it's not in what we have, it's what we've given away. And if we can learn that and tell that story corporately, we can learn that and tell that story, live it out on an individual basis. And
that's the power of the diversity we talked about, because Tom and I had a conversation, well, it's been months ago, like over our lifetime, you made a statement, over our lifetime, we will probably give X amount of dollars to the ministry. Remember, we talked about that a number of months ago. And when he said, I went, wow, you think about it. But then it allows you to rejoice when you see kids in the academy and, what you're giving goes to that. And when you see college students going around the world, you go, I had a part in that. And when you see you leading a missions trip, man, we had a part in that. That diversity of ministry, it just feels like you're really investing every time you get. And I've never done that. Like when I gave as a church member, non-pastor, I was never one of those guys who goes, hey, Tom, I'm going to give you this, but here's what I want you to do with it. There was just such a freedom in going, I'm bringing it to the church. And then as they made wise decisions, I just rejoiced in what I was able to be a part of.
And I always say this, I love to participate as a giver, and I separate giving as a giver from leading as a pastor.
Yes.
I have no bent on how my money is being spent.
None.
I'm just happy to give it. I just tell you this quick story. I was walking through the campus yesterday, and a pastor in town here, a good guy. He's just trying to lead revitalization in an older established church, and he's got good opportunity to do some things with his facility, and I was trying to be careful because one of our buildings are bigger than all that they have. And I was showing them around and trying to give them a good picture and walk them through some of the opportunities. I was walking through our academy, and a little kindergartner kid saw me and said, she looked at me, a real adorable kid, and her teacher, all the kids were in the hallway lined up, and her teacher was leading him, and the teacher, being very respectful, says, "Oh, it's the pastor," and kind of like kids you're supposed to be. And this little girl looks up at me and she goes, "You're very old, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, I am very old." I said, "Older than you can imagine."
Yeah.
And it was just kind of, but it made me think, there's nothing quite like today as we sit here on this campus. There's 2,000 people sitting here on campus today. I mean, 1940 or whatever, but employees, college students, I mean, there's probably even more than that. But we're making an impact in people's lives today, and you have no idea what these people are going to become. I mean, I don't want to be too premature on some of this, but some of the most influential people here in the city are Trinity kids, and they screw up. And we poured into their lives and gave them a platform where they're going to be able to do something of significance. And it's not just true here. It's literally true. Churches are being pastored. Global missionaries are being sent. Church staff members everywhere. Church leaders. Just it's incredible.
But when you connect your generosity to that outreach and that impact, there's where there's a joy in giving. If you don't connect it, you'll see it as a bill. You'll see it as a tax. You'll see it as it's not as an investment in a diversity that you can just rejoice in the impact of it.
So the last one here we haven't jumped into really is the ministry expansion. So there's, there's years ago it was let's all be together in one place, in one location. But if you're around us enough, you hear us talk about having a network of neighborhood churches. Daniel, what's the importance of being generous so we can expand our reach?
I think
Because he needs an LED wall.
Oakley doesn't have one.
I think there's a couple of things, and some of it's practical. Some of it is just recognizing the way that we're going to do ministry in this season or this generation, in this time that we live in. And I think there are dynamics in church life, and we could really get into this. I love church, the science of church life, and but it's like, hey, there was a time where, in fact, we could go around the city right now and start naming churches, and Trinity would be one of those where, the regional church was the way to really effectively reach your community, and you had a big hub, and people would drive. I mean, it would be not, and we still have members that this would be true of, but it would be more true to go back 25 or 30 years, and people were driving 45 minutes or an hour one way to come to church. And
I was the bus captain on a bus that went to
Arlington.
Arlington.
And that's actually a great example, Joel.
Arlington.
So historically, it's always been a part of like the DNA of who we are. Hey, we were going to go to the farthest reaches, literally. So to Mayport, you can't go further until you hit the Atlantic Ocean. So we were going to go to the farthest parts of our city to help connect people into the mission and the story of God. Fast forward, the number of years, and the way the vision and the DNA of who we are has really not changed at all, and just simply the method or the way we've felt led of God to go about that has, and some of that is just the changing dynamics of the world and the culture we live in, which have become very neighborhood centric, and that's not just generally, but even within Jacksonville. Our claim to fame, is that we are the largest.
Jaguars?
Well, yeah, of course, but that we're the largest city in terms of land mass. I saw this map the other day of Duval County, and it had like San Francisco, Chicago. It had like 4 huge cities sitting inside of the Duval County map. And the idea is that over the course of time, the city has become neighborhood centric. And we want to lean into the place God has placed us. And so for us, being able to move into these neighborhoods like Oakleaf, like Mandarin, in ways that make sense for us and with their community has just been kind of the next part of that story. But what has always been a really consistent DNA about, hey, getting to every part of our city, to share the message of the gospel.
You know, every church is unique, and if there's a pastor that would listen to this, it's important. You should never try to imitate another church. You end up being a cheap imitation of the real thing, and you have to be careful about it. Every church is unique. They do things differently than every other church, and they probably do things better than other churches too. Every church is in a unique context.
Yeah.
And Jacksonville, like Daniel said, it's the largest land area city in the world, and clearly the largest in the United States. And we had a strategy 35, 40 years ago that we were going to be not just a regional church, but an attractional church. And we created programming and outreach that brought people to us. What we experienced was that we were not equipped to do sustainable ministry in that way. And we went through a long period of time of trying to figure that out. Mm-hmm. And some positive things happened for us. Transportation got easier, roads got built, locations became more accessible. And because of where we're located on the Hammond campus, we didn't suffer what a lot of churches suffer because of location. But then culture changed. And the culture years ago where, people would drive 30 miles, 25 minutes to go to church, and here a lot of that's interstate travel. That's context matters and culture matters. And so, we saw that, hey, the growth is not all going to come towards us. In fact, I was involved in a study years ago that, 80% of the money that's made in the city of Jacksonville, 80% of all paychecks are earned in a very narrow slice of the city on the literally from the downtown down to the down to 295 and 95 merger. I'm like, man, we got to get out of where we're at, or we're going to be limited in our ability to impact people. And we started looking at high growth areas. At the time, I wanted to go south. I wanted to get on the bottom part of where that massive growth was. And just through a series of gathering information, it became more sensible for us to start in Oakleaf, which was, at the time we went out there, it was the fourth fastest growing community in Florida. And it was one of three fast-growing areas in Jacksonville, and it was the closest one to us. So literally we're 12, 13 miles away from here, 20-minute drive, and launched it by sending out a group of people from here. And all of a sudden now it made sense. Hey, we've got two campuses within 12 miles of each other. If you can get people in a 15-minute drive distance to come to us, now all of a sudden our drive distance, it's gone 15 minutes beyond where we were. We can reach a greater part of the city. And once we kind of figured out the model, which it's, I think it's not that it's not without, it's push pull and things that you learn and give and take kind of thing. But once we figured out the model, we said, okay, if we did that once, can we do it again? And God opened the door for us to do, this one's a little different. It wasn't a startup, it was a merger, already built in kind of facility and resources and people. And now we are literally cascading where that campus is another 20 minutes away, and we can reach a set of people there that we would never reach from here. And that strategy is going to work for us. Now, we may not have, the biggest campuses, but we can be strategically located in a way that hopefully in the future we will put the entire city of Jacksonville in reach of one of our campuses because we had a multiplication strategy. And that multiplication strategy is part of this whole, hey, we're gonna be generous. We're gonna give away. We're gonna go further. We're gonna try to be the hands and feet of Jesus, the presence of Jesus in places that we may not be able to impact in our context and in our culture if we don't develop this kind of strategy.
By the way, in 2020, the neighborhood dynamics got accelerated. What COVID and the shutdown did in 5 months from March to August was 5 years worth of change in terms of the what I would call neighborhood
Neighborhoods.
dynamics, and specifically as it related to employment and vocation. And all of a sudden, everybody is working from home, and then a sizable percentage have remained that way.
Yeah.
And now, you've just eliminated for a large group of people. At least there was one thing still causing people to commute, and it was their job. And then for a lot of people, that went away, and all of a sudden, the home or the neighborhood and the community literally became central to their entire life. Now, again, 2014 or however long, we weren't looking ahead thinking, oh yeah, this is coming, but praise the Lord. I mean, it accelerated and probably reinforced in our mind, hey, this is the way to keep doing ministry.
Well, it's been a great talk about vision, trips down memory lane, talking about timelines. I think that was a fitting season finale. Don't forget, this is our season finale for the podcast. We're going to pick it back up after Christmas. Again, we appreciate you all tuning in. If you would like more information about Multiply Mission, what we talked about, maybe you're invested here at Trinity, you can find that information out on our website at tbc.org/multiply-mission. You can make a pledge on there. You can commit to give. But again, thank you so much for listening and being a part of this journey for all of us. And we will see you after Christmas. Have a great time in the holiday season.